everybody, and welcome to the EOW Theater. So we are going to start this very, very special evening with Nainoa tonight. We're going to start it with Steve Grimes, who is going to be singing just a few songs about the voyage, about Mālama Honua, about Hōkūleʻa. And I just wanted to say a couple things about Steve. He is a luthier. He has been a luthier for about, let's say, 40 plus years. He builds mandolins, ukuleles, and guitars, and he is an award-winning songwriter. So with that, I will ask Steve to come out on stage.
And it's a real pleasure and an honor to be here tonight. The last time I got this incredible privilege was a couple of years ago, and I was asked to do these two songs I'm going to do tonight. I was asked to do them at Hōkūleʻa's homecoming in Honolulu, Magic Island. I think that was the most people I've ever played for at one time in one location. They said there was 25,000 people there. And they had the jumbotrons and all. It was pretty exciting. A couple of years before that, I had the privilege also to be in Vineyard Haven, Martha's Vineyard, when Hōkūleʻa came into port. And there was maybe 1,000 people welcoming Hōkūleʻa into Martha's Vineyard. And the local indigenous Indian tribe, the Wampanoag tribe, was there to greet Hōkūleʻa. And I'll tell you, it was one of the most emotional experiences of my life to watch the crew of Hōkūleʻa do their welcoming ceremony and hula, and the Wampanoag tribe doing their tribal dance, and there was gift giving, and it was just a chicken skin moment. And so I was inspired by that, and a few months later I was back on Maui, and I was looking out over the ocean because I was stuck in traffic on the Pali. And there were these patterns in the water, I guess a combination of current lines and wind lines, but it just looked like a road that was going across the water. And I was inspired to write this song, and it's called The Ocean Road. On the open sea, from the world of walls, I heard the call to set me free. I sail for peace of mind and new points of view, to know what is to know and what is true. I am a mariner whose fate is cast. I run with the current, steering through the past. The more I see, the more there is to see. I'm a searcher, a lover of discovery. And the wind whispers through my mind. And the sea, the stars will help to find the course to follow to our destiny. Across the ocean road, to see your destination, you must see where you have been. To see the journey's end, you know where to begin. I sail without and I sail within, through the wisdom of the ancient ones who live again. As the breeze slips across the sea, and this ease I feel come over me. The birds, the moon will tell me what they see across the ocean road. To tie the line from distant time to all the common bonds that intertwine. Strangers we meet and become strange no more. Sisters and brothers who welcome us ashore. And the wind, the common air we breathe, see the stars, the signs we heed, as we venture on to unfamiliar shores across the ocean road. Out on the ocean road, upon the ocean road. Thank you very much. I would like to invite a couple of guest singers on stage. Before I mention their names, I want to tell a little story of this song. My wife, Mariana, asked me to write a song for her 8th grade class in Lahaina that had to do with Mālama Honua, because that's what concept that she was teaching her 6th, 7th, and 8th graders. And so I came up with this song called Mālama Your Mama, and here to sing it with me, my wife Mariana and Mia Lee. The people you love, you better hold on to. You got to give them your time and the best that you do. Don't let them stray too far away. You got to love them like there won't be another day. 'Cause nothing can be better than good family and friends. So make sure that the bond you share never ends. 'Cause if you let it go, you ain't never get it back. And that's just a fact, Jack. So Mālama your mama, Mālama your dad, Mālama Ohana, the people you have, your uncle, your cousin, your neighbors too. It's our kūpuna to do all we can do. The world we know is changing fast. So much we take for granted will never last. And once it's gone, you know it's gone for good. the things we've been blessed with, we should knock on wood. Wherever you wander, wherever you roam, there's one roof we're under, we're all here at home. This planet is an island and the sky is the sea. It's your land, it's my land, so I'm sure you'll agree. To Mālama the Aina, there's so much to do, not just in Lahaina, cause the world needs you too. It's gonna take all of us, but it starts with you. So Mālama yourself, 'cause that's the first thing to do. Now what you gonna do when it all comes down and the fake food's all that comes up from the ground and the fishes in the ocean all floating on the top? Is that the only thing that's gonna make us all stop and take a look around and find a better way for every living species to see another day when the sun shines down on a world in sync and all God's creatures aren't living on the brink? So it's time we all stop before it's all gone and there's no time left to right the wrong. We gotta get down to it and we all gotta do it. Won't you help me get started? Help me sing the song about Mālama Honua taking care of the world. We all Hōkūleʻa, every boy, every girl, every mama, every papa, every sister, every brother got to get together, try to help one another. Mālama, your dad. Mālama, ohana, the teachers you have. Mālama, your mama. Mālama, your dad. Students you have. Mālama, your mama. Mālama, your dad. Mālama, ohana, the planet we have. Mariana Grimes, Mia Lee. Thank you very much, folks, and I'm excited about tonight's presentation, as everyone is, I'm sure. Thank you.
Aloha mai kako. Aloha. Thank you all for joining us here tonight at the historic Iao Theater for what is certain to be a historic talk by Nainoa Thompson, Mālama Honua, In a Changing World, Hope Comes with Action. My name is Christina Lizzie, and I recently began as Executive Director of Maui Nui Marine Resource Council. We call ourselves MNMRC for short. It is an honor not only to be standing on the stage before you, but to get to do the work that MNMRC does towards its vision for clean ocean waters, healthy coral reefs, and an abundance of native fish throughout Maui Nui. For those of you who don't know us, I just want to give you a quick 2-minute overview of who we are and what we do. For starters, we are an 11-year-old organization that is community-based, science-driven, and non-for-profit. We were born out of the vision of co-founder Robin Newbold, who's here on stage with me tonight, and the late Uncle Ed Lindsay. Thanks. Our slides might be going a little faster than I thought, but I just want to say before we got to this slide, one of the things that we do is we monitor water quality along our nearshore waters at 41 sites along West Maui and South Maui. And we do that with an amazing group of volunteers and our partners, the Nature Conservancy and West Maui Ridge to Reef Initiative. And we call our group the Hui o Kawaiola. And these are some of our wonderful sponsors that help make that program possible. Thank you. You can go to the next slide. We're also working both upslope and then in the water in the Ma'alaya area in order to address the sediment runoff that harms our corals in that area. And so we just got a grant recently to address the fires that are breaking out up there. So we'll be putting in fire breaks to help reduce the types of fires, how large the fires can get, and hopefully that'll help stop some of this large amount of sediment that can then run off and harm our coral. We'll also be working in the water by putting oysters in the water to help with filtering some of the sediment and the pollutants that are there. We can go on to the next slide, thank you. We also do outreach and education. So some of our campaigns include a sunscreen awareness campaign that help us all understand what are the effects of the sunscreens that we use and what can we do for more reef-friendly alternatives. The next slide. And we also bring the community together, like tonight's event featuring Nainoa Thompson, and then our next event, which will be on November 6th, and it'll be a tribute to coral, Maui's living corals. So we'll be bringing together the Hawaiian perspective of the importance of coral, as well as a scientific perspective. So we hope that you can join us back here on November 6th again. Next slide. And if that was enough of a teaser for you for what it is that MNMRC does, please feel free to stop at our booth outside to get more information. Check us out on social media. And you can also always email me directly at christina@mauireefs.org. Next slide, please. And last but not least, a very important thing, we want to extend our deep appreciation to the Maui County Mayor's Office of Economic Development for helping make this tonight possible through their financial support, and also our collaborator, Maui Visitors Bureau. And I'd like to now turn it over briefly to Ipo Mossman, who's here to represent the Mayor's Office, and then Nicolo, and then we'll bring on Nainoa.
Thank you, Christina. It's really so very humbling to be here with this group. The Maui Nui Resource Council has done such a fabulous job. Unfortunately, the mayor could not be here tonight. So on behalf of the mayor and the Office of Economic Development and HTA, which I happen to be the liaisons here in Maui, we really look forward to this. Nainoa is not only a very, I grew up with this guy, went to school with the sister, know the mom and dad, Uncle Pinky and Auntie Laura. And so it's really nice to see what he has accomplished and how proud we all are of that accomplishment. So with that being said, I'm going to turn this over to Nicolo, and thank you.
Aloha. Nainoa Thompson. That name really needs no introduction. The man is a cultural renaissance man. The man's name is synonymous with Hōkūleʻa, Celestial Navigation, Pacific Voyaging Society, and that word Mālama Honua. Mālama, to take care of things properly. Most people forget the properly part. So tonight, listen to his message, visualize his lessons, and I challenge each and every one of you here to take back these lessons and make a change to Mālama Honua for those who are yet to be born. Ladies and gentlemen, aloha to Mr. Thompson.
People, thank you. Whoa, you turned the light off.
Wow. Aloha mai kako. I was expecting about 50 people, so I'm a little bit kind of intimidated right now, but Ekolo, thank you for the introduction, and Ipo, always good to see you and remind us what matters, family. And so what a beautiful introduction. And to everyone that's putting the evening on, I just found this whole short moment of time with you all that's been very kind and caring for me and my staff that's here. So it makes all the difference in the world, and so thank you. And then to all of you that would take time out to come and look at some really old slides that I have, like about 40 years old already. I should update them, but then I shouldn't, because in the end, this presentation is about my teachers. It always is. It never changes. And so everything that I do was values that I was taught. So thank you for the permission to bring them into the room. I'd be much better if that light were dark, by the way. Focus on the slides. But besides that, I have a ton of slides, not enough time. I'm going to go through them real quick. I apologize now. And because there's a lot to talk about this island,
This extraordinary island that some scientists say that there's no other one like it. It's so rare that it would have an atmosphere that would allow you to go outside and not get radiated because of a thin atmosphere called the ozone, or a magnetosphere that would block solar storms, or the fact that we're in the Goldilocks zone where we have liquid water at the surface, essential for life, and a lot of it. It would be one in which the island rotates at a certain speed that would create circulation through Coriolis, and therefore the oceans primarily and the atmosphere primarily are one big giant living system. It would have all these things and many, many more where that we're just blessed. So we need to, so why don't we take care of it? And the next slide. This is going to be a short evening. And it's about these islands, the one that we all share. You know how extraordinary they are. I don't need to go through it. These miracles in the sea, the most enriched ecological living systems on the planet. Because the ocean isolated us, no, it connects us. It would take, on average, 200,000 years for a single species to get here. And would make this place just rich beyond imagination, and we need to take care of it. And next slide. And I'm just going to talk about what I know, voyaging. And it's 44 years old, and a lot of changes. What I'm going to talk about today is about, because I saw in your write-up, we're talking about choices, whether we're going to choose from extinction or renaissance. If you look at the data, if you look at the graphs, and there's two stunning graphs. One is exponential population growth, and mirroring that is exponential extinction of wildlife. And then it gets worse when you start to look at other graphs of changing the chemistry of the oceans and the atmosphere. Things that we can't see are the things that are most dangerous. Next slide. Okay, I think there's a real problem with the slides. We're not in sequence. Sorry. Maybe go backwards a little bit. Maybe I can figure it out. Some more. Go back one more. You know what? You're kind of in the middle of the presentation. If you can go back to the beginning, it'd be a lot better. Any questions, guys? Is that the beginning? Try the next one. Yeah, that's the beginning. Thank you. Okay. Okay, we did this one already. The next one? Next slide. Yeah, okay, thank you. Part of the miracle of these islands would be the longest ocean road in ancient times of any culture on the planet that would come and so-called find the single most isolated high island archipelago on the earth. That would be at least 2,200 to 2,400 miles long, depending on what island it came from, isles in the south. And it came around our best guess at the time of Christ. And if we will define ourselves by our relationship to place, then the Hawaiian culture may be the youngest culture on the earth, except for the place on the earth that wasn't discovered till then. That would be Antarctica. And yet they may have been the most expansive. And guess what? We don't know, because we forgot. And that is a great danger of our time. And there's reasons for that. Nevertheless, these are great voyagers. We don't know the name of the captains or the navigators. We just know they came from islands in the south. Next slide. But then when we start to talk about choosing extinction versus renaissance, there is evidence that Native Hawaiian populations exceeded carrying capacity by the way that they lived around the 13th century. And so that there were population crashes. There was an introduction at the same time around the 13th century called the kapu system, complex. But it was actually very simple, that it would essentially create a system where people could only live in 17% of the land, that 83% was for the ancestors and for the protection of fresh water. And in that system, the laws are very strict, but very simple. You break them, you die. And those laws were an interrelationship between the way people live and nature. And the third thing that happened was voyaging ended around that time, between 600 and 700 years ago. We don't know why, but we think it was because this refocusing of the kinship of people and place on the islands. And they thrived. When Captain Cook came in 1778, he would write in his journal about a people that were completely self-sufficient, completely self-reliant, strong, healthy, and very sophisticated. And he talked about the definition of wealth not being what they accumulate in terms of monetary gain, but they talked about its relationship to protection of fresh water. And but he also put Lieutenant Bligh, who would eventually become Captain Bligh on the Bounty, on Kalai South Point to do a census, the first census in Hawaii. Now that number is heavily guessed, anywhere from 400,000 to 1.2 million. Take an average, 800,000 Native Hawaiians, 100% self-sufficient, nothing brought in. Water, it's about water. And then the mo'olelo would change. That on 28 years later from that arrival, Europeans came. 28 years later, 75%, the guess, this is Kamehameha School statistics, I'm not making it up, that 75% of Native Hawaiians would die from introduced disease. And the mo'olelo in Maui, I remember from Uncle Charlie Maxwell. He would talk about, not enough sand to bury the dead lying down, so we buried them standing up. It's the beginning of a rough story of continued and continued loss. So, there was the belief by our chiefs and our princesses that even thought that even in their will, the will was not designed to be perpetual, because we don't know if Native Hawaiians would survive. Would they go extinct? But choices had to be made, and choices were Queen Emma, Prince Kohio, and others, Pauahi. They would build foundations where Native Hawaiians would survive the decline. 100 years ago, there'd be 22,000 Native Hawaiians, 1 out of 37 would die, or would survive. And story goes on, my father was born in 1924. He'd be the first generation by his family, whose mom and dad, nearly pure Hawaiian, spoke Hawaiian beautifully, beaten in schools by the teachers that had permission. Public schools in 1926 outlawed Hawaiian culture and language by policy, essentially. The black road of extinction was being well paid. My father would be the first generation in maybe 100 that would be not taught language, culture, or genealogy. Forget who you are. Don't remember where you come from. You're going to get hurt. The black road is paved. There's a choice. And there were those pioneers that I bring into the room that would make the choice. Next slide. Next slide. If you want to know where Hōkūleʻa came from, it came from him. He was the first that had the dream. His name is Dr. Ben Finney. He was a surfer in Santa Barbara that looked at Polynesia, this giant country, this ocean universe, and how in the world was it discovered? And he became an anthropologist, and in his postdoctorate, he would end up in Hawaii, at the University of Hawaii. And there would be a woman there, a professor, you can count them on one hand back then, women professors, that would hand him 2 books. One was called Kon-Tiki by Thor Heyerdahl, that they came by raft, aimless, drifted by storm. Wrong. And the other was by an anthropologist, world-renowned. His name was Andrew Sharp from New Zealand, who said, no, they had voyaging canoes, we know that. The evidence is there. But they did not have the intelligence to navigate more than 100 miles. So that the people that came to Hawaii were pushed here by storm. It's numerically, mathematically impossible for a canoe to be pushed from Tahiti to Hawaii. But this man would then take a decade, 1968, to make a single phone call that would change everything. And he would call, funny, he didn't call Hawaii because the extinction and the road was so well paved that nobody knows about voyaging. Nobody. He called this man in Chicago. Next slide. Herb Kawainui Kane. That would be arguably the greatest artist in modern times. That was a historian. He was a sculptor, a painter. He was many things. But he was a researcher. And he would research Pacific culture. Ben made the right choice about who to call. So these 2 men got together. It was science and culture, technology and tradition coming together, diversity coming together to build a new road, a road of renewal, a road towards Renaissance. I was there. I was young. Next slide. And they would remap the oceans, the Pacific Ocean. We had there was no map when I was in school about a triangle in the middle of the Pacific, 10 million square miles, bigger than Russia, physically the largest nation on earth, 3 times the size of the continental United States. And then when you exclude the landmass of Aotearoa, New Zealand, add up all the total square miles of all the islands in that triangle, you can fit it into 1/3 the state of New York. It's 600 times more water than land. This is an ocean universe. And what makes it, and so this is a people of common ancestry and so forth. But if you take it back far enough in time, you have to understand this Austronesian-speaking people went to the Americas for sure. And when we were in Cuba, it's undeniably a strong, kind of rooted language that has the same key words in Cuba. And then we know for sure, if you go behind the map on the western side, you end up on an island called Madagascar, 300 miles from Africa, that mountains, streams, beaches are the same root language, 15 time zones. Next slide. And then they would build the spaceship of our ancestors, physically build the tool to go and to pursue an idea more powerful than anybody ever imagined. And even if we didn't find the island, it was worth the pursuit, just to be there, to be a part of something different and new. There's plenty of stories, but I'm going to skip them. I'm really worried about time. All I'm simply going to say, well, the next day we took it out. There were 35 people on board. This is North Beach of Kanoe Bay called Kūloa, sacred. We ended up going aground, and we broke the 2 steering sweeps. We didn't know where to tie the sheet line. We didn't know what a sheet line was. And we ran up onto a sandbar, true story. We were aground. The captain tells everybody, get off. Everybody gets off, true story. The canoe floats higher. It's full sail, no steering sweeps by itself. And the captain was solo. And I was going, whoa, this is going to be a rough one. But what it was the recognition of how much we didn't know. And so it was rough. It was hard. Next slide. The navigator. This is another extinction. Herb searched everywhere in Polynesia, came up with one name, elderly. The end of the line, 3,000 years. Te Wake, an island of Santa Cruz. And I never met him, but he's heroic. Herb sent a team down to his island of Santa Cruz to talk to him about navigating this canoe that didn't have a name, it wasn't constructed. On a sail plan, he had no idea, going to go to islands he'd never seen. And a crew that wasn't selected, and he just said, well, we'll see. Herb knew he was the last Polynesian navigator. And the team went home, and Herb received a letter from Te Wake's granddaughter about 6 months later saying that he got up one day, he said goodbye to the family, he went into the canoe house, took a small canoe out to sea by himself, and never came back. We know what extinction smells like. We know what it feels like. But I was always inspired about this man who had defined the last voyage on his own terms, that he'd rather be at sea than be in the land. He's a true ocean man. And, but that's extinction. Then there's another miracle that changed that extinction. Next slide. This man. I wasn't there, but my understanding that I was told leadership was trying to consider this voyage, with Hōkūleʻa not even constructed yet, wasn't even named, to navigate it ourselves, but just use the stars. And that's the kind of stuff that you don't know how much you don't know. And it's extraordinarily dangerous at sea. And there was another miracle by a man by the name of Mike McCoy. He was a Peace Corps worker, and he worked on an island called Satawal in the Western Carolines, not in Polynesia, in Micronesia. And he said, if you want a navigator, he's 5 miles down the road. He's staying on a ship called the Thompson Cromwell, a UH research ship teaching scientists how to catch tuna with traditional lures. His name is Piailuk. Nickname is Mao. Mao means to be fierce, to be strong. Leadership went, I wasn't there, went to talk to him. He spoke very little English, and they said, hey, will you help us navigate a canoe that's not constructed, but it'll be 8 times bigger than yours? Take a voyage that'll be 6 times longer than the longest you've ever done. Cross the equator to stars you've never seen before, and you'll lose the North Star. And sail with a crew that's not selected yet. And I was told that Mao just immediately said yes. So the obvious is that he is an ocean man, that he is courageous. He's a navigator. He's a master. And that mastery is in a tradition called Puo, where they graduate into a deep-sea navigator. And at that time, when they asked him the question to go, and he said yes, there were 6 in the world, and he's the youngest. He's the edge of the last, of all the great navigators on the planet. And he said yes. Next slide. This is his island called Satawal, mile and a quarter long, half-mile wide, no lagoon. The Spanish, the Germans, the Japanese, the Americans had no interest here because it had no military value. So they never colonized the island and took away the school. This is our school. Everything we know comes from here, 3,000 years. I asked the chiefs on Satawal, how many navigators have been trained on these beaches? They said maybe 1,000. And miles at last. Next slide. Hawaii on the top, Tahiti on the bottom. Next slide. Just follow the blue line, you do fine. You're going to cross the world's 2 biggest wind systems where they collide with the high evaporation rates of
every day, very hot in the equator. It's called the doldrums. Scientists call it intertropical convergence zone. Heavy lifting of warm, moist air. Cloudiest, rainiest place on the earth. Sometimes when the sun comes up, you can't see it because it makes the rain turn blue because it's so thick in there. It's very difficult. If you're standing on, where are you? At Kihei and you're looking south, and you can imagine the eastern side of Tahiti and the western side, less than 1 degree. And Miles got to go find that. Just with nature. Next slide. And they would go, 17 on board. Honolulu Bay, Maui, departure May 1st, 1976. Epic. First in 600 years. And they would go. Not sure, nobody was sure that they would find the land. It was a time of high risk. It was a time of danger. I was there. I was at the beach when they took off, and I remember how this community prayed for this canoe. But I also knew there was a part of the community that didn't care about it because it was Hawaiian. Hawaiian has no value in the modern day. And there were those that I just sensed, even though I was young, that they feared it would be successful because it would change everything. And next slide. Yeah. Arrival, Papaete, 17,000. Over half the population of all of Tahiti was there. I was there, flew down. I somehow made the crew to take the canoe back home from Tahiti to Hawaii, and had to climb the monkey paw tree to see the canoe because there were so many people there, and had to ask the children to get off in English because I couldn't speak their language, even though this is your family. This is Ohana. And that day that Mao brought this canoe along with Captain Kavika Kapahulehua to Papeete, everything changed. It started to change. The thing that changed the most was identity of Native Hawaiians, that they could see themselves as coming from a history of the greatest navigators and voyagers on the earth. Changed everything slowly. Next slide. The Mao would stay with us for 25 years, come back and forth from his island to train us and teach us. Next slide. And we would give us, he would give us our dreams back, and he would teach us to be safe at sea. There's many stories I'm not going to be talking about, lack of time. And the big one that I'm going to not talk about, if I'm going to talk about it, it would take another half an hour. That's Eddie. And I'm not going to bring him in here unless I can tell the whole story. But Ma would come and take us by the hand like children, pull us through the window of time into the old ocean. Nobody else on the planet could do it. Miracle, Renaissance. Next slide. Yeah, and then we would sail all of Polynesia in 13 voyages. We'd go north to Alaska. We'd go west to California. We'd go south to Aotearoa, New Zealand. We'd go, east to California, and we'd go west to Japan, all in the Pacific. And Mao was the one who really trained us, along with, and I'm ignoring another 200 amazing teachers that we just don't have time for. Next slide. Renaissance can be defined by many things. You can't go and dredge a coral reef with a permit and go fill in an ancient Hawaiian fish pond and transform that to a gated, expensive beachfront property. Can't do it anymore. Laws have changed. The protection of water by law has changed. Many, many things. The thing that was most important was our schools changed. 1985, the count was estimated, and the statistics I was told, there were less than one Native Hawaiian pure native speakers. Statistics I saw last week were 19,000. Hawaiian Studies was a cubicle with 2 staff, Abraham P. Anaya and an assistant, buried in history. Now it's across the whole state in all the university systems. On and on and on. Education is really the pathway to the future we seek. Next slide. Then voyaging would change forever. At least for me, not everybody will agree with this. I don't believe we have the privilege and the permission to sail anymore, only to go find islands in the oceans. 1968, humankind would leave the gravity of the Earth and go into orbit around the moon, Apollo 8. This would be the first orbit when it went around the backside of the moon, and astronaut William Anders would take a photograph of the Earthrise. The first one. When we see the Earth as an island. And then it would arguably be when, at that moment in time, that the global environmental movement would begin. Now think about that. It's 51 years ago. It is not a long time, especially when industrialization and revolution started 5 times more longer than that. And we had no idea what was happening. No idea. But what this did was impact Akikioka Aina, Kuaina. Next slide. Best friend. Raised in Hawaii. The Earthrise would change him. He would graduate from high school here. He'd fly fighters in Vietnam. He would crash the second day he was there in a river behind enemy lines and somehow don't die. He'd fly for the Thunderbirds as the lead pilot, best in the world. Best in the world. And then he'd be Hawaii's second astronaut into space after Ellison Onizuka. Important name, along with the other star man, is Lieutenant Colonel Lacey Beach. And he was a hero of mine. Never met him. I never thought I would. He don't live in Hawaii. He lives in Houston. Why would I see him? But his high school, in 1991, would have this thing at the Waikiki Shell. You guys know Waikiki? That thing with the big dome, and everybody sits on the grass. And and they had all their alumni from Punahou to go up stage. It was like the 150-year anniversary, and tell everybody how good they were alumni, and impress everybody. And then the keynote in that evening was Lieutenant Colonel Lacey Beach. He'd be the last. And this true story, high security back then. I wanted to come see my hero, so I jumped over the chain link fence, because I didn't want to pay. And true story, high security, right in the back door of that place where they had the curtains, just like this, like curtains on the side. So I hid by the curtain. Nobody knew who I was. Nobody cared. And I just stood there. And then he arrives in a white limousine, 5 doors, shouldn't be on the road. He's in a white tuxedo, black bow tie, fighter pilot, Type A, and he walks right by me. He gets on stage. He shows SCS-39 with Columbia, a videotape and standing ovation, and he walks right by me going off stage. And I thought, wow, that was cool. At least I got to see him. And then I went home, and true story, I get a phone call from the governor's office the next day. The governor doesn't know who I am. He don't have my number. And 6:30 in the morning, somebody from the office goes, Lieutenant Colonel Lacey Beach wants to sail with you today. We were training for a training sail from Hawaii to Rarotonga. We're at Pier 39. We're not Houston. That's the old, decrepit pineapple shed that nobody uses anymore. And I was thinking, wow, the astronauts will come down, meet me over there. Are you crazy? And so I was smart enough to tell the guy, whoever was on the phone, oh yeah, tell him come down to Pier 39 at 9 o'clock in the morning, because my crew's coming down at 8. Just know, our crews are just regular. They're just regular people. And so I get them all together. I go, hey, you guys, you got to be your best today. My hero's coming, and put something on your feet, wear a T-shirt, and do your best to speak your best English. And true story, Lacey shows up. It's just amazing. In his mother's rusted DeSoto. He gets out of the car, he walks to us, and he's got no shirt on. He's barefoot, and his shorts are ripped. And he gets on the canoe, and everybody's like in shock. You know, that moment, a very uncomfortable moment. Nobody knows what to say. So we like stare at each other. And I'll never forget it. In that uncomfortable, quiet moment, he would rub the rail of Hōkūleʻa, the hot wood. He would rub it, and he would rub it, and he'd rub it. Then he'd finally say, thank you. Thank you, thank you for letting me sail in Hōkūleʻa today. Because today I will really learn the truth and the power of exploration. Then I leaned back and said, this guy will be best friend. And we did some pretty crazy stuff, but not enough time to tell you about it. So we go on. Next slide. But he loved Hōkūleʻa, and by coincidence, his next flight, STS 52 or 53, I can't remember. By coincidence, we'd be coming back from Rarotonga in October of '91, and he'd be in the shuttle, Columbia. And so he did some crazy stuff. I don't have time to tell you about it, but all I heard, he stole his radio out of his fighter in Ellington Field in Houston, got some engineer to hook it up illegally in the shuttle, and then he wanted to communicate with us because we had to have that kind of radio to be able to connect with our old single sideband. This is before satellite phones. And anyway, it worked. It was pretty crazy. He was talking to 35,000 school kids in Hawaii. Next slide. And then then we would do that sail. Next slide. And then he would come home and say, Nainoa, I got a present from you from space. It's a photograph. So here's a cockpit window. That's the island of Hawaii. On the bottom right is a kind of tiny red dot on the clouds on Mauna Kea at 12,500 foot elevation. There's a place called Keanakāko'i. 35,000 years ago, there was a glacier in Hawaii. There was an eruption there, and it super cooled the lava and made a very hard, fine-grained stone. That stone you see floating in the cockpit window was given to Lacey by his grandfather. And the story is, I don't know how, but somehow his grandfather was given that, and they believe it came from Keanakāko'i. So Lacey smuggles a hard, heavy, sharp object in zero gravity in the shuttle, floats it in the window, takes a picture, and starts talking about the Earth, the island. He starts talking about, it's the first conversation I heard him start talking to me about the island Earth. About, we need to fix stuff. Something's wrong. And he would say, the way we do that is to honor 500 years of those who figured out how to live here, the ancestors. 500 years back, and that was symbolized by the ads. And then he talked about the power of science and technology and bringing them together. But he said, you got to be careful about science and technology. You have to make sure you know what's navigating it, and needs to be good human values. And that he said, and then he had, and what symbolized that the place he loved the most on the earth, and he'd been everywhere, is here, home. When you ask Lacey, where's home? It's Hawaii. Not Houston, not Florida, it's here. Next slide. But let me say that he didn't really believe that. Even though he would talk to me about it, he didn't really believe that. Should I go to the next slide? I think we're going backwards. Next slide. Next slide. Awesome. Okay. Can you go back? All right. Christina, it's going to be a long night. You can kick me off anytime you want. We would get our calendar books and cross out one day. That day was couple. Nobody could touch it. I'll meet you in Hilo. Then we illegally rent a car. We drive up the Saddle Road, and we would turn left onto the black lava of the north flank of Mauna Loa. At 6,000-foot elevation, we would go there because the black lava will absorb all light, bring stars close. And the stars would be what would stretch your mind to allow you to imagine more than you can really believe. And our job was to figure out how can we link Hōkūleʻa and the shuttle to bring it together for the benefit of children, because they need to know how to explore, to figure out what our generation cannot. So Lacey was talking about this already on the Black Lava Rock, on Mauna Loa. And we would spend the whole night there, but always, next slide, it would go to the island. Him and Mao, the two starmen, were the most optimistic human beings I ever met on the planet. They can solve anything if they prepare. Lacey, when he started to talk about the language of the earth and nature changing, he would get so angry because he could not figure out the solution. He'd get so angry up on the lava rock, I'd have to hold him physically, settle him down. He just felt things were out of control. It's 1991. He's a scientist. He knows the data. And so that's when I started to get into the intensity of this man and his passion for this island. And next slide. And then it was in the next flight he took. He was a mission specialist along with his partner by the name of Bill Shepard, who became the commander in the International Space Station when it became fully operational in year 2000. And him and Bill would have very regimented sleeping and working times. So one would work and one would sleep. You're stuck on the wall of the shuttle with Velcro going around the Earth at 90 minutes at 6 miles per second. And Bill knew how much Lacey loved his Hawaiian Islands. Bill saw in the inertial navigation system that the Hawaiian Islands would come up with the shuttle dawn, that bright yellow glow. Bill broke protocol, scrapes Lacey off the wall, floats him to the cockpit window, takes off his goggles, and Lacey, and he never told me this, but Bill did. Bill said, in the most quiet voice, Lacey said, "That's it. That's the answer. It's home." That Hawaii has all the attributes of living sustainably. We have more natural power on these islands than any place on the planet. We have a history of Native Hawaiians who produce enormous amounts of food for food sovereignty. Lacey would go through all the lists of things that you need. We can do it here. But the thing that Lacey told me, emphasized, said the thing about Hawaii that is the most important that the world doesn't have, the culture in Hawaii, not defined by race or the boundaries of nationalism or the geography of other places. He said, what Hawaii has is the power of diversity that is respected.
that's cared for, that's honored. And that its culture in Hawaii is not defined by those other definitions. It's defined by values. And what Lacey said, the greatest value Hawaii has, its culture is still kind. He's correct. Next slide. And then he would say, Hawaii needs to become the laboratory and the school for living above the islands. Then it can create the light for the earth. And the gift that it will give to the earth, this is verbatim, the gift that it will give to the earth is peace, because it's a light. My best friend.
And then he would say, Nainoa, we are changing the earth. It's changing us. We don't even know it, let alone we don't know what to do. He would say, we can't protect what we don't understand, and we won't if we don't care, and we can't do it by ourselves. Take Hōkūleʻa around the world. You need to touch the whole earth. It needs to touch you. You need to make connections that translate to relationships of kindness. And the big question is, say, when you go, find out, is humanity still kind enough to change? 1991, the seed was planted. And we wouldn't go because we were scared. Next slide. It would be late September 1995. Multi-million-dollar trained pilot, Surgeon General never picked up the mole on his back. By the time they found out he was sick, he was stage 4, lymphomelanoma. His wife calls me and says, you got to come today. Get on a plane and come today. So I did. I land in Houston, go to his house, dimly lit, 100 people in there, quiet, sad, no Lacey. I said, Alice, where's Lacey? And she said, he's in the bedroom waiting for you. He don't want to talk to anybody. I go inside, he's too heavy to walk and in a wheelchair, and fighter pilot. And he was still optimistic, going to beat all this, but he still said to me, he said, Nainoa, even though he's optimistic, he says, you mean to make me 3 promises. You make 3 promises. Next slide. You take Hōkūleʻa around the world. Next slide. And you listen to the new language, a language we don't know. It's foreign. Climate change, sustainability, acidification, hypoxia, dead zones, sea level rising, melting Greenland, drowned Majuro. The new language. Pay attention to the language. And the third thing he said, next, you promised me that Hawaii will be the school and the laboratory for the light of the earth. Promise me. So I did. I go home, and 6 days later, he dies. That's for the promise. Next slide. Next slide. And we wouldn't go. 13 years. It's called Ohanava'a, the leadership statewide. Every single island comes together once a year, maps out what we're going to do in voyaging collectively, unified. Every year, the worldwide voyage vision would come up on the agenda. Every year, we would be so inspired, ready to go, until every year on the agenda, well, how risky is this? What about the hurricane, or the pirate, or the mosquito, or the rogue wave of South Africa, the violence of the Middle East? Is it worth it? Every year, when we went down the list of risk, we vote no. 13 years later of voting no, they've been meeting April 1st in Honolulu, 2008. Remember Lacey said, listen to the language? Think about it. 1991, we didn't know anything. 2008, it's top of the agenda globally. Listen to the language. The question before the leadership of voyaging wasn't about should we go. We knew we had to go. The question was, what's more dangerous? The hurricane, the rogue wave, the pirate, the mosquito, or stay tied to the dock and know and do nothing? That is the question of extinction or renaissance, is whether you stay tied to the dock or you go. We voted 4 times. Had to be unified. If we're not together, it ain't going to work. We're going to go. Had no idea how to do it. Next slide. You can kick me off anytime you want, Christina. I got like plenty more. We started not knowing what to do, refurbished Hōkūleʻa, 64,000 man-hours of volunteer time. This is called Minahoni Weekend. When we're behind schedule, 100 people would come to the dock to last year. Come at Friday night, you go home Sunday night. Nobody sleep. Work. They're building this amazing community that wanted to be a part of something special. Next slide. Train the young. It's the final duty. You want to have a future that's worth it, support them. It's the most important generational gift we have. Train young navigators, young captains. Next. We had crews from 25 different canoes. There's 18 Pacific Island nations and many organizations. I want to just say that the thing that was so beautiful was all this diversity and people coming together. I never heard a loud argument once. It was extraordinary. It's something that transcends beyond us and the things that get in the way of us being able to let go of the lines. Next slide. We built a second canoe, Hikianalia, powered by the sun, electric. Didn't work. Only half the voyage. Did not have the technology and the power. So we did half of the worldwide voyage. Next slide. Yeah, it was a long trip. 13-7 months, 41,000 miles, 18 countries, like 327 ports, and 322 crew members that sailed 1,000 miles more. At least one leg. Next slide. And then we would leave. It was amazing. Head west until you come home. Next slide. Navigated probably half the voyage with nature and half the voyage with instruments because it was too dangerous. Next. Tahiti, homeland, permission. Next. Samoa, take the Secretary General Ban Ki-moon sailing. He would sign our logbook. Next. But he would write a note, put it in a bottle, gave it to us, committing the 127 countries of protection of the world's oceans. Prior to this, barely prior to this, oceans was not even on the environmental agenda in the United Nations. Wrong. Next slide. Aotearoa, next slide. We would go to this cluster of 11 schools, the poorest of the communities in New Zealand. They're all Polynesians. 2,400 children that were trained in what we call Manaya Kalani, borrowed from the star lines of the Hawaiians, taught how to navigate, leave their country, but they know the way back in the traditional navigation, and teach them science and technology, coupled with that, to give them a chance to get out of poverty. Next slide. Sydney, next slide. Great Barrier Reef, Reef Guardian Schools. Try to listen to 270 schools. What are schools for? What's the purpose of schools today? What are they supposed to do to prepare children for a future that we were not prepared for? Reef Guardian Schools, 270 elementary schools, 7,400 teachers, 120,000 elementary school kids. The primary purpose of their schools is to protect the oldest and largest single ecological system on the earth called the Great Barrier Reef. It was amazing. When a kindergartner can't hold your hand, you got to take a couple fingers and drag you through where they're growing corals and fish and algae, and they're protecting seabirds and turtles. They got a chance. Even though the struggle is very, very difficult, they're right today. They got a chance, a whole nother generation coming up. Next. And we would go to amazing places next. You know, where apex predator matters. This is kind of an uncomfortable day going up the anchor chain, holding the chain in front of all the sharks, but never mind. Next slide. And then it's not impressive. We went to places you can walk on the rubbish, on the plastics floating, walk on it. Next slide. Africa. No Panama Canal. You can go through Suez, but you got to cross Yemen and Somalia into some pretty rough stuff going on in the Mediterranean and the Red Sea. Or you can go around the southern tip, the Agulhas Point and Cape of Good Hope, and hope you don't get hit by the highest incident of rogue waves on the earth. And very dangerous stuff. The reason why I bring up this slide, board members when we were in Bali were saying, before we got here, were saying, now I know it's too dangerous to go around Africa, ship the canoe to Brazil. I said, well, you're the board members, I'll do what you want, but you make me do that, quit. You want me to put Hōkūleʻa on a ship I don't know, and a captain and a crew I've never met, to take away the risk from us because we're not good enough. And I said, you do this, I quit, because our people in Hawaii have trained so hard that I know they're good enough, and don't take it away. It's worth the risk. And so, next slide. They let us go. It was the shortest leg of the worldwide voyage. We changed 32 times, actually 34 times. It was 900 miles, shortest leg, but it was the longest, 61 days, hiding from cold fronts, one at a time, tying up to fishing boats. We can't even speak their language. And tiny little harbors, just is such a rough place. But I want to point out, for those of you who study the oceans, that at Agulhas Point, when we went across there, NASA actually has a photograph from space. There was so much plankton, 900 miles in diameter, like a giant gyre of rotation. There was so much plankton that when we sailed through there, it was like Avatar for real. You see every individual fish breaking the surface. When Hōkūleʻa would push away from the bow, it would just be like dominoes, a gazillion dominoes of life in the water. Once we crossed that point, every single day up to Cape Town was what they call super pods, 200 whales or more per pod, everywhere. So there are these sanctuaries. They're amazing, and that they define life on this earth. Next slide. It was rough, kind of nuts. Next slide. But we made it into Cape Town. And this was really important to me because in 2013, Archbishop Desmond Tutu, who had carried 20 million poor children on his back for 40 years, came to Hawaii to bless Hōkūleʻa and made a promise that if you make it there, I will come down, because he was sick, I'll come down and greet you at the dock. And so we made it. We didn't kill ourselves, and we were there. And next slide. And then we would come to the dock, and they brought him by van. It was November 15th, 2015, and it was the first public appearance he'd make all year in 2015. And they brought him outside. They made a tent. He had a couch. It was a hot day. He had him in coats and wool hats and everything else. Lay him down on the couch. Apologize. He's not going to speak today. He doesn't feel well. And we're just like so blessed that he'd even come. And so we brought children from charter schools, from public schools, and from Kamehameha. And they brought their pahu to play for the Archbishop, to thank him, to honor him. And so we're there at this arrival, and there was an African girl that would go to a Hawaiian girl. I didn't see it happen because they don't have drums. They have cracker cans. And asked her if she could borrow her drum. The Hawaiian girl said, okay. And while the speeches were going on, this girl was hitting this drum. Then more and more African children became comfortable. They came in, and they started hitting their drums and their cans. You couldn't hear the speeches anymore. And then one African girl grabbed the Hawaiian girls, and they started putting them inside into a circle and started dancing. Next slide. And Archbishop Desmond Tutu's daughter said, Nainoa, you need to turn around. And I saw him dancing in the streets with our children, halfway around the world. Then I knew this voyage was worth it. It's about connections. It's about relationship. It's about aloha. It's about believing that we can come together to solve anything. That was the moment I knew this voyage was worth it. Dancing in the streets with our children. Next slide. This would be the first photograph we would take. Coming into America, we chose the Everglades opposed to Miami. We wanted to see the alligator opposed to the craziness, yeah. Next slide. Then we'd go many places to the home of my friend. Next. Where he lived and where he flew. Next. We'd go to New York. Next. Take the bottle back at the United Nations with 18 pledges from 18 countries to protect the oceans. It's the time. And Secretary General was there. Next. We'd go up to Nova Scotia. Next. And then we would go up 2 mountain ranges up into the Great Lakes to go to a place called Kawanake, where there was a lady there, and she's still alive, that's why we went, who was a nun, left the nunnery to open up the first immersion language school on the earth in Canada, Kawanake. Then she was asked to come to Hawaii to testify to our legislature and to our government and to the Board of Education of why you should have Hawaiian immersion schools. She was the architect, part of the architecture of Punana. We found her. Over 2 mountain ranges, 62 locks, barely fit. It was awesome. And next. Panama, next. We're in our saltwater Galapagos, first island. Next. Yep. 1% of the land and 1% of the oceans human beings can go to, 99% for nature. Think about that. What are we doing to the earth? Next. We would enter Polynesia through the eastern end of Rapa Nui. Next. And we would come home. The CEO from Hawaii News Now, Rick Blangiardi, would say after this event, the school lunch, Nainoa, talked to you, and he said, the arrival of Hōkūleʻa will be the largest viewed event in Hawaii's history. But he said, but we knew that. He said, what we didn't know that millions and millions more would be outside of Hawaii, that they're watching. What I remember about that voyage the most, it was how hard it was, how many challenges it was, how dangerous it was. 410 days at sea, 900 days in foreign soil, sometimes as much as 30 people from Hawaii and around the world. I never saw a single loud argument ever. We chose diversity. We took the risk of being different, knowing that we have to be different. We need to bring difference into the room so that we can solve the issues of the earth, because the whole earth needs to solve it. That was the most powerful thing about the voyage. Diversity, unity, and kindness. Next. Language is louder than ever. The projections are getting better than ever. And if the projections are correct, the arithmetic on the planet's not going to work. Sorry. It's not going to work. So, we find ourselves at the very same place. The choice. It's a choice. Extinction, Renaissance. Next slide. Our children are choosing Renaissance. There's a navigation class that was formed at Kamehameha schools because of the Mālama Honua Voyage. We went to the class and said, hey, figure it out, guys. Draw a line from the Aleutians to Antarctica and Chile to China, where the intersection is. Let's call it the center of the Pacific. Where is that? And then when you find that, pull yourself up vertically from that point in the middle of the sea. How high do you have to be to see the shorelines of the Pacific Ocean that we all share? That Hawaii's in the middle. They come back, they go, oh yeah, 40,000. I go, no. All right. Commercial airlines fly at 40,000. All I see is water. They go, no. Not 40,000 feet, 40,000 miles. 1/5 of the way to the moon before you see shoreline. The Pacific that you're in the middle of, half the salt water on the planet, 1/3 the surface of the earth. All terrestrial lands on the whole earth fit in this ocean. But by the way, it's one ocean, it's one circulation, but it's our home. So our tiny, tiny little piece of the future is to do what we're supposed to do, voyage. And it's exactly aligned to this room. It's all about the oceans. Next slide. We told them, put the star compass on the middle that Mao taught us, the 32 star lines, the star houses, and where do they connect to Alaska, to British Columbia, blah, blah, all the way around. And let's say these are the points of connections we need to make with the earth. Let's circumnavigate the Pacific. And let's make connections, relationships. Let's learn. Let's come together. Let's solve. Next slide. We leave Hawaii, we go up to Alaska, we come down the Americas to Peru. We don't want to go much farther south, it's just too hard. Next. We come into Polynesia, our home, to connect with our family, to Aotearoa. Next slide. To the big islands of New Zealand, to the big islands of Australia, to the poor islands of Melanesia, to the lands of my teacher Maupiailug in Micronesia. The stage going to the 7 big economies that have to be part of the care. Because if they're not part of it, it's not going to work. So it's a 4-year educational campaign to build friendship across the Pacific. Next slide. Next slide. It's interesting, the diameter of the Pacific Ocean is farther than the diameter of the Earth. This trip is longer in distance and time. It's 46 countries and archipelagos. It's massive. It's going to take at least 300 to 400 crew members, and we'll find them. Next slide. Our focus is voyaging, do what it is as the tool, as a platform to connect and build bridges. Build bridges to people, to place, to stories, to solutions. It's part of the equation. Build bridges. Next slide. And the big thing is the oceans. So we want to connect, it's not good enough just to do the Pacific, so we have invitations of places like Bhutan, we have invitations like the places like Iceland. We'll send teams of young people to go discover other places of the earth that the canoe won't touch. Next. And the importance of indigenous knowledge, wisdom, practice, values. The way that we understand the kinship between nature and those people that depended on its relationship for survival. If there's an indigenous people that are alive today, they cracked the code, otherwise it wouldn't be here. Next slide. And couple it intelligently with science and technology. It's key. I was at a meeting 2 weeks ago with scientists around the world. Some are saying that it's too late. We waited too long. It's extinction. And the big issue is carbon. That there's no solution unless we get rid of it. There are other scientists that we talked to and engineers that said, no. We have the best technology on the planet. We can take carbon out of the atmosphere. The challenge is scale and cost, depending on how you define cost. If it's monetary, that's one thing. But if you do nothing, it's 100 times more costly to do nothing. The technology is there, so that is a choice on the renewal side. And the work that you're doing on your coral reefs here in Maui. The choice would be to do nothing. The projection is we have no coral in 20 years, correct? Correct. That's the projection. This year was supposed to be mild. It wasn't. It was the worst year. Or the other choice is we know, beginning to know how to genetically modify corals to handle the heat. And funny enough, we're finding corals in the place that you'd expect the most not to be there, in the dirtiest of our harbors, that are the strongest. There is a choice that we need you to make on Maui as a gift to the earth. That's just one of 1,000 choices. Next slide. Next slide. And community. We have got to come together. There's no choice. The United Nations has made Hawaii the first hub, island hub on the planet, saying that top-down government is not going to solve the problems that we have on the earth. Solutions have got to come from localized communities. The work you do in your community matters. Guess what? It's not just for you. What you do in your community, that your community benefits from, your children benefit from, you know what? You're doing it for the earth. And we need to build those bridges and grow that fundamental belief that everyone can do something if they make the choice for Renaissance. Next slide. Education's everything. I'm not going to go into it. I would be all night. It's everything. What are schools for? define that question, design that school, and have children prepared to do what we couldn't do. Next slide. I have 3 left. I'll let you people go home. You must be falling asleep. 1980, we would sail Hōkūleʻa to Tahiti and back. After 28 months of immersion living with Mao, the rules were strict. If I didn't touch salt water in a single day, he'd make me swim off the cliffs of Portlock at night. Touch salt water every day. And then we would sail, captains and navigators and crew from Hawaii to Tahiti back. We would find Tahiti and would find Hawaii. It was about 5,000 miles. And then Mao was packing his bag to go home for the first time in 28 months. He stayed with us. That is the definition of the teacher that I wanted to bring in the room. But he would sit me down and go, okay, Nainoa, you did okay. Then he said, I give you everything. Otherwise, maybe you die. The ocean showed you everything, but it'll be 20 years before you see. He said, if you want someone, this is important to know. If you want someone to know everything, send your son because you're too old. That is because when do we learn the relationship and the kinship to nature? I believe it's when you're young. When do we start teaching that? Then he said, my grandfather chose me when I was 1 year old on my island, and he'd take me and he'd put me in the tide pool to play. In the tide pool, I can smell the forest. I can taste salt. I know what sand feels like. 1 year old. At an old age of 5, he was voyaging already. His grandfather put him on the canoe and he takes his hand to go like this. Yep, the wave come, lift the canoe up and down. When the canoe go up and down, the canoe make me sick. So my grandfather tie my hands and throw me overboard and drag me behind the canoe. Do that in the public school system. But Mao never, ever once, ever got to see his all love for his grandfather. Yeah, I said, yeah, my grandfather tie my hands, throw me in the ocean, so when I go inside the ocean, I can go inside the wave. When I go inside the wave, I become the wave. And when I become the wave, then I'm navigator. It's the kinship, it's the relationship, it's a different connection to nature. The world needs navigators. We need to take responsibility to teach them. We need to become the wave. The wave is movement across this earth, one community at a time, one story at a time. Next slide. We need to be inside the wave of change. Next slide. And we got to keep our promises. When we don't, there's no trust. And there's no trust, we don't have anything. Next slide. You know, sometimes I feel crushed. I don't even want to get up. And I find myself motionless and unable to decide the routine things in a day because the data is so bad. And then I'll go outside and I will force myself to look at the beauty of a sunrise or a sunset. Remind myself how lucky it is to be alive. And be here in this precious moment when we need each other the most, ever. And stop whining. I'll go inside my house and put my 2 children to bed. They're twins, they're 10. And at the time that they sleep in the deepest, I'll remind myself I have promises to them. And I know at the time when you're the weakest and the data is the strongest, that you find that is the moment in which leadership needs to define itself. That it needs to become the place that creates the seeds of hope and inspiration and power and belief. That's when leadership needs to transcend the fear and let go of the lines. When I look at your work, that you've come together to create this moment in time, that the Maui Nui Marine Resource Council committed to the work of knowing our oceans, and for whatever it's worth, from my point of view, it is the most important work. It's easy to witness the polar bear or the blue whale, but what's the most dangerous? It's the things you don't see. The oceans and the atmosphere and the changing of the chemistry. That monitoring that you do on Maui needs to become a school for the earth, because you're a school for Lacey. I am honored to be here. It's one community at a time. I'm no one, just a witness to being with people that are committed for the right things at the right time, at the right moment. And I deeply, deeply thank every one of you in the room, every one of you who is standing up for what's right, and knowing that you're not by yourself. I want, and I know our community would want to sail for you, take you with us, because the lives of our children depend on it. So thank you.
Thank you, everyone. If you want to stay for just one moment, Nainoa will take about 3 questions. We have time for that. I know that's a very short number, and this has been such an amazing and heart-touching presentation tonight. And I know for myself, I understand more the role that our own island plays in caring for island Earth. And I hope that this call to action has touched you all deeply in your hearts as well. So we'd like to take 3 questions, and I'd like to first offer the first question out to any keiki that we have in the audience. Do we have anyone who is under the age of 18 that would like to pose a question to Nainoa tonight?
Hi, my name is Marcy. I go to my high school, and my question for you, Uncle Nainoa, is basic. How are you feeling, and how's your day going?
I'm not very good of a public speaker, so I'm really intimidated. I'm just glad this thing is over. But I'm really honored to meet you guys. It's been a wonderful day. Thank you. Thank you. Beautiful day.
Thank you.
Right, we have 2 more questions. Anybody else in the audience would like to ask a question? We have one back here.
Aloha, Nainoa. Thank you so much for taking your time to speak with us. I am a preschool teacher here on Maui that I really love my job, and we're very connected to nature. And I'm also leaving in January to go meet my dad in Florida and sail to Thailand, down around the Horn, well, actually through the Straits of Magellan, and across the Pacific. And I'm very excited, but I wanted to know, what is the best way to carry on the message of the Hōkūleʻa and Mālama Honua, and to be able to bring it back here and share it with the kids?
Wow. Straits of Magellan, huh? do know that it's going to be a powerful learning experience, and it's going to be things you can't even imagine. So I think maybe the best thing is keep us in mind when you're there. Travel, explore, learn, collect, document, write, bring it home to your classroom, especially the age group you're with. It's the most important. And then share it with us. And from that, help slowly start to shift what we do in classrooms and help connect our children to an amazing world that you're going to see, an amazing world. That's just my tiny little advice. Thank you.
We have time for one more question. Anybody on this side around here?
Could you tell us a story about Eddie?
Christina, I'm telling you, it's a long one.
It's up to the audience. Everybody in? Okay.
It's a hard one. It's emotional. You got to turn this light off, by the way. I don't want to be speaking in the bright light. God, where do I start? Oh, man. Wrong light. I can move over there, but... Okay, Eddie, I mean, he was just absolute heroic proportions, right? I mean, those that knew him, he would be like one of the most named, renowned in big wave surfing on the earth. He, still to this day, when I talk to many surfers, they say he still holds the record for catching the biggest wave unassisted. No jet skis, towing, and all that kind of stuff. 55 feet. And then he also was, do you know that he was the only one, lifeguard, until Butch Van Arsdale was second, that would be permitted and certified to lifeguard Waimea Bay. Because guess what? No jet skis, only a fins. And stories of him dragging two guys in, drowning, two guys at once. Drag him into the shore break, pull him up the beach, scream at them. Because if he wasn't there, you're dead. And said, don't you ever come back on this beach. Because they were drunk, they don't know what they're doing. And do you know that and I don't know the exact number, but the city and county requires lifeguarding. You gotta have a record of all the time you go out to save someone, so you gotta log in. And I know it was over 600 times. How many times did you have to go out to go rescue somebody? He'd have to go out over 600 times, and here's his record. In one column is, how many people did you lose? He lost 0 when he went out over 600 times with his fins. But the thing about Eddie that was just like so impressive to me was he was primarily, in my tiny relationship with him, was he was shy. And in that shyness and that humility, everybody loved him. Everybody, especially young children, especially children who need the heroes the most, that have the least in their families. The broken ones, the homeless ones, the ones sleeping on the streets. They need Eddie. Eddie loved Hōkūleʻa. He comes and tries out for the crew. How does the top waterman in the world come try out for the crew with us bananas over there? I can't even talk to him. He was so powerful but quiet and powerful, and I couldn't even talk to him. And but he's trying out for the crew. Are you crazy? And but I remember this was like, I don't know, 2 weeks before we were going to leave in middle of March, 1978. We were at the Honolulu Medical Group, and we're on the 4th floor, and they're taking our pulse, see if we could breathe or whatever, and a few shots and stuff, and we were in different rooms, and by chance, my hero comes out. I go in the elevator, he comes right in behind me, and so I'm in this, I don't know how to talk to him, and he wasn't even with me, he was, those I remember those old elevator doors, they have that kind of stainless steel edges around where they close together, and he was tapping that edge with his hand, and he was really, really far away, spiritually, someplace else. Get down to the lobby, door opens, he walks out, I stay in the elevator. And he walks down the lobby, turns around and goes, Nainoa, I need to sail Hōkūleʻa. I need to go down the road and pull Tahiti out of the sea and bring dignity and pride back to our ancestors and give it to our kūpuna and our children. If anybody was clear about why they're voyaging, it was Eddie. And without getting into blame, let's just say it was a bad time for leadership choices. Boy, I know what it feels like. And when you start to make the first choice that consciously you know it's wrong, the next one's easier. And the next one's easier. So it's day of departure. It's rough in the Alawai Canal. Eddie comes down with the surfboard, his surfboard, goes to the captain and asks the captain if he can put it on the canoe. And he wants to surf Tahiti. Captain made the decision, a leadership decision, said yes, tie it on the rail. Yeah. And then we would leave around sunset. Stormy, bad weather. We'd be in the Kaiwi Channel between Molokai and Oahu and Lanai around midnight. Kaiwi is the name of the channel between Molokai and Oahu because the current opposes the wind, causes very steep waves, a lot of white water, and the color of the white is the same as Kaiwi, the bone. And at midnight it turned to gale. A lot of the crew was sick, couldn't work. Leadership was not around. I remember grabbing a flashlight because something was terribly wrong. The canoe was too slow, and I don't know what it was wrong, lack of experience, whatever. I wake up a crew member, we take all that junk off the hatch, and we open up the hatch into the hull, put the flashlight in the hull. It was just like crystal clear, pure aqua, salt water to the top of the hatch. We're flooded. And then we call it stacking waves with there's an infinite amount of wave trains through there, especially in the gale. Big wave moves faster than smaller wave. When it gets by the smaller wave, it gets on top of it. it stacks. The stacking wave was so big, it picked up the whole canoe and it rolled it over, full sail, underwater. And that wave actually saved us. Because when it flipped it over, the windward hull still had air. So it floated and trapped the air inside the hull, upside down. So midnight, a crew of, I don't remember, 13 or 14, on 42 feet of this sharp keel on one hull, the other one's underwater, and the waves were 10 to 15 feet. Gale in the Molokai Channel, and knocking you off. And the surfboard was there. So at dawn, it was so windy that you cannot listen to you because it's too windy. You're all sitting on this keel. But you see Eddie in front of the captain. You can't hear what he's saying, but you know what he's asking. Every cell in this man's body, 600. He's got to go help those who can't help themselves because they're going to die. The golden rule is you never leave the ship. The winds are north, cold, hypothermia is real in March. You're getting knocked off the waves. The question is how many waves? How many waves did it take the person cannot get back up? And we're drifting south. And I forgot part of the story I'll tell you now. Before we left the Alawai Canal, leadership got up in front of our communities. Parents, wives and husbands, children, family, friends, strangers, praying for you. And they said, we don't need an escort boat. Be okay. We have a single sideband radio, but if it doesn't work, don't worry. We'll call you from Tahiti in 30 days. Nobody knew where we were. There was no check-in. Eddie was talking to the captain. All you see is Eddie sit down. The answer was no. But mid-morning, you see Eddie up again. And by the way, I can do this. I have permission from his family. I keep asking them, can I talk about Eddie? They keep saying, stop. You're part of the family. We trust you. So I have permission to do this. Mid-morning, you see Eddie in front of the captain. You can't hear what he's saying. It's too windy. Then you see someone wrap a black knitted bag around his waist and put a bag of poi in it and some oranges and tie a life jacket on his neck, and he's going to go. And I'm nobody. I'm just a crew member. But it was just, all wrong. It was wrong. It was wrong. So, and there's reasons for that. So when Eddie's about to leave, I swim out with him just like, I don't feel good about this. I'm nobody. I'm not a leader. I can't do anything about this. But I grab his arm and say, when he's sitting on the surfboard, and they had no idea what to say. And he says, do you think it's the right thing to do? And he pulled his arm away, and he didn't even look at me. And then he paddled off into these big waves. You see him climbing the crest, then you lose him in a trough. And then I knew there was a problem. We call it ehukai. It's when every time a wave breaks, there's salt water. Every time there's white water, there's salt in the air. But when you have an infinite amount of big waves breaking in the gale, there's so much salt that it makes like a fog. It's called ehukai. The fog was so thick you couldn't even see the island of Oahu. You couldn't see Maui. You could barely see the tips of Kamalo on Molokai because it was so high. And you could barely see Lanai tips, Lanai hale, because it was in the lee of Maui, in the north wind. This is daytime. We are way out in the wild. Nobody knows. Eddie takes off. The problem with that is Eddie had poor eyesight. Eddie was paddling to an island he couldn't see. He's paddling to an island he can't see. I'm answering the question. We get rescued. And that's a whole nother story that I will not go into tonight. How the co-pilot knew. Because the air traffic controller called me 30 years later and told me the story. We get rescued at midnight. I was in the first basket to go home first, because my job was assuming Eddie made it. How would they know? And if he didn't make it, I'm supposed to find him. 2 o'clock in the morning, I land at the black tarmac of South Ramp, Honolulu National Airport. On the black tarmac. There were hundreds of people there, media everywhere. I didn't know anybody except one old white rusty van amongst all those cars. It was the ICAO van. So not understanding and being careful about your words, I go to the van, assuming that he made it. And I open the door, and there's Eddie's father in the front seat, powerful, quiet Hawaiian man, and his mother, beautiful Hawaiian lady, in the back seat. And then I say, and I wish I could take it back. I go, "Where's Eddie?" And I think rightfully so. I will never forget what the sound is of a mother, not just crying, but wailing for her son in the gale, calling for her son lost at sea. It would be the largest, greatest land, sea, and air rescue attempt ever to find the one that never lost anyone. And our whole job was to find him, just one person. Civil Air Patrol was flying because I was working with them. Coast Guard would falsify missions to fly too low because they were looking. People were renting planes and helicopters. We rented a helicopter. The captain's name was Tom Houtman. I remember. David Betancourt, a family friend. Saul Aikau. And I were in the back seat. True story. There wasn't GPS back then. They had VOR signal. You had to cross to get a position. We were flying at about 1,000 feet, and we see something flipping in the water, a surfboard. True story. The pilot takes us down, and we see this thing just rolling in the surf. And rolling in the surf. I don't know if it's Eddie Surfboard, I don't know. Nobody talked. We fly back up 2,000 feet to get the VOR off of Maui and from Molokai and Oahu to get a position and to call into Honolulu to give them the position of the intersection of the VOR signals. Went back down and we couldn't find it. Coast Guard cuts it off after 2 days. It's expensive to search, but they wouldn't cut it off. And then you had fishing boats out there. Nobody fishes in the gale. They weren't fishing. Then you had these disorganized groups of people that were just searching the rocks on every island, thinking, we cannot lose him. Maybe he made it to the island. Maybe he got hurt. I can find him. And I don't know. It was so crushing. I can't remember time. But it was over a week. Nobody would cut it off. So, the Aikawa family lives in the Chinese graveyard on the north side of the slopes of Punchbowl. They would be considered, by economic terms, not to be very wealthy. They were custodians of the Chinese graveyards, of the graves. Old wooden houses, and Pop Saikao, maybe after 10 days, calls a press conference, the quiet one. I was there. It was like, the graveyard was full of cars, and they had this small living room, small dinner table, stuffed with microphones and pads and pencils and reporters and cameras, and I was like, and Pop speaks to the press conference, and he goes, okay, Hawaii, today, you stop. You stop looking for my son. Let him be in the sea. The family doesn't want anybody to get hurt. It was over. There were no dreams. There's no hope. There's no beliefs. Only the chronic pain of shame that was beaten into you in a society that felt that you were going to be less than good enough because you're Hawaiian. And the fact that we lost the greatest waterman in the world. And the story goes on and on and on, but in essence, to make it short, and I didn't want to talk about this story. But if you really want to talk about extinction, and you really want to talk about Renaissance, there was some kūpuna that came together that when us guys, us young guys, strong enough to go deep sea, whatever, but did not have the courage to believe anymore, hid. I would go on, I was a commercial fisherman, I would go on the ocean by myself during the day. I would go look at the stars at night and never believe we'd ever sail again, ever. But man, you ain't good enough. Then there would be this group of elders. And the one that led this group to Renaissance was my father. Google him. Google him. Underage, landing on an LST, Normandy, D-Day. Falsified his birth certificate. Father told him, hey, you go fight for your country, you go fight for your land, you fight for your people, you make shame, no, come home. He knew death the day he landed on the European invasion. Fought 400 miles first scout, the last 2 minutes in battle. He lasted longer than that. He fought 400 miles, 1 mile German border, green fatigues, white snow. German sniper shoots him in the head. And he don't talk about it. But his best friend from Oklahoma would come to our house, and I would badger him. I want to know about my father. Why doesn't he tell me about those stories? Underage, falsifies birth certificates. Said, yeah, in the wounded on the front lines, they had limited medical supplies. The ones that had a chance to live, they put in one pile. The ones that didn't have a chance, they put in the other. But they only gave the limited medical supplies to the ones who had a chance. Why waste it on the ones that are going to die? And that's what my dad was. The Oklahoma man and this other man picked him up on a cot. He said, the Oklahoma man said, we put him on a cot, we took him beyond the lines. The other man stepped on a landmine. He died. Shrapnel went to my dad's body, too close to the internal organs, never operated on. He said, the reason why we took your father behind the lines to get medical supply, he was a man of courage. Where does that come from? New York hospital, 2 years, bandaged the 2 eyes, tried to protect it, didn't work. His surgeon got him into Colby College, into social work, to help those kids that need it the most, that our society serves the least. We were the broken child. So he comes and finds me, hiding. I rented this 1-bedroom house in Hōkūleʻa, in the grass. Doesn't look in my eyes, too much shame. Comes from behind, puts his hand on my shoulder, goes, hey, Nainoa. You got to get up. You need to go to Tahiti. He said, get your leadership in one room tomorrow. I want to talk to you. When you talk about the moment and the genesis of where does Renaissance start, it begins with him sitting us down. Leadership couldn't even look each other in the eye, let alone talk to each other, and just said, you need to go. You need to harness the power of vision. Be absolutely clear where you're going and why. And the big question is, who do you serve? And then he said, who is going to navigate you when you're so broken? It's only your core values that will bring you together as a team. Define them. Then humbly go to your community. Because if your community's not with you, you'll go nowhere. It was a sail plan. It was the map. My father. Then he said, you guys don't know how to do this. 95% of success is in the training, and I know that's correct. Voyaging is an exercise of a physical feat that is earned because you prepared. And that's not what we did when we lost Eddie. He goes, I will hold you. You make up everything you need to do to be successful. The other 5% is just you don't know what nature's going to do, and you can't control that. But you give me that list, I'll hold you to that list, and you can't go until you earn the right to go. Don't talk about departure dates. Then he said, when you're ready to go, then you guys need to get together and make one decision. Is the voyage worth the risk? And then he said, if it is, let go of the lines, have the courage to go. That was to his son. 45 minutes, we're together. We walk outside, we're going to go. 45 minutes took one warrior to put us on course. We had the navigator. He's my father. Except when we went into the bright sunlight, this was in the biomedical building, and it was dark when I got out there. My eyes were really sore because the light was so bright. And he turns to me. I remember his black silhouette coming at me. He goes, hey, Nainoa, you want to navigate? Where's your teacher? Because what happened when Mao got to Tahiti in 1976, he vowed never to come back to Hawaii. He said Hawaii was crazy. He said people do not know how to get along together. They break the rules. Mao vowed to never come back. He was supposed to sail with us. He left us an 8-track cassette tape. Most of you guys don't even know what that is. And said that, you know, first crew, not too good. Second crew, probably no good. Kimo send my clothes to send my clothes to my island. And then he said at the end of that verbatim, nobody come look for me because you're not going to find me. He's gone. My father knew and told me in that bright sunlight, in his silhouette, he don't come, you don't go. So I flew to Micronesia. I didn't find him. He let me find him. And we talked. The many, many genius of the greatest navigator on the earth was one when his head was low. We sat on a driftwood log on a white sand beach. He knew about Eddie. He was very sad. And so our meeting was very short. I said, Mao, we need you. We need you to come back to Hawaii to teach us. We need you to help us show the way. Will you come and teach? I had no idea what I was asking. Navigation's power. It's secret. You don't give it to anybody because they'll abuse it. Not only is it kept in the language of the culture, but it's kept on each island. Not even on each island, it's hidden from family to family on the island. I had no idea when I said, will you teach me? To give it to someone outside of Micronesia? How ignorant could you be in the question? But Mao said, like Tevaki said, we'll see. I went home, my first thing my father said was, he don't come, here's the rules. You don't come, you don't go. So I get a phone call from Mao's son Henry in Saipan about 2 months later saying, Mao's going to be at your house tomorrow. Can you pick him up at the airport? And then, you know, word got around that he's going to live with Nainoa, who lived by himself. He was a commercial fisherman. He didn't wash his clothes. His bed was like the Shroud of Turin, and he had no food. And neighbors are stuffing food in my freezer. And he lasted 3 days. Then he moved in with my mom and dad. And then he stayed there 28 months, took us by the hand like children. Dragged us through that window of time into the old ocean that nobody could do. And then we vowed to pull Tahiti out of the sea for Eddie. When you go out in the sky and you find the scorpion, Hawaiians call it Kamakau Nui or Maui, the great fishhook of Maui that pulled islands out of the sea. That's Eddie. Every time we sail and we see Kamakau Nui or Maui, we know why we're there. Eddie is the other crew member that's on every single voyage. Don't whine. Don't complain. Take care of each other. When someone's weak, carry them, because someday you're going to be weak. Because Eddie would do that. Anyway, that's a short version of an amazing, amazing.